I'm Lucia, 22 years old, and last year on my birthday, my entire world imploded. I just finished my junior year of architecture school with a 3.9 GPA, and I was so excited for the family dinner my parents had planned. That excitement vanished when mom slid two documents across the table, proof they'd sold my car, and emptied my college fund for my brother James, and a loan agreement for $25,000 they expected me to sign. Before you continue watching my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button to see how I turn this betrayal into my greatest victory. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Westfield, Pennsylvania, in a blue two-story house with white shutters and a front porch where my mom would sit and gossip with the neighbors on summer evenings. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Mom taught fourth grade at the local elementary school. Dad worked as a sales manager at a car dealership, and there were always photos of my brother James and me displayed proudly on the mantle. But appearances can be deceiving. My mother, Sandra, was what you might call a control enthusiast. She had a vision for our family and expected everyone to play their assigned roles. She managed our schedules, our appearances, even our aspirations with military precision. Her favorite phrase was, "I know what's best," and questioning her judgment was treated as a personal insult. She had long auburn hair that she dyed religiously every 6 weeks, wore perfectly pressed clothes, and never left the house without full makeup even to get the mail. My father, Robert, was her perfect counterpart. Tall, with thinning brown hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled, Dad was conflict avoidant to a fault. He'd rather agree to anything than deal with Mom's disappointment. When tensions rose, he'd suddenly remember yard work that needed immediate attention, or find an urgent reason to check something in the garage. The few times he tried standing up to Mom ended with silent treatment that could last for days, so eventually he just stopped trying. Then there was my brother James. 2 years older than me at 24, James had always been the golden child. He had our father's height and our mother's charisma, with an easy smile that charmed teachers into giving him extensions and coaches into giving him second chances. James was handsome, athletic, and could talk his way out of almost any situation. The problem was he needed that skill far too often. By the time I was finishing junior year of college, James had already dropped out of 3 different universities. The first was a state school where he lasted almost 2 semesters before deciding the business program wasn't challenging enough. The second was a private college that offered him a fresh start with a more engaging curriculum, according to my parents, where he made it 4 months before losing his scholarship due to poor attendance. The third was a community college where he enrolled in just a few classes to figure things out, but stopped showing up after 8 weeks. Cars didn't fare much better with James. The first was a high school graduation gift from my parents, a used but reliable Honda that he totaled 6 months later while racing friends after a party. The second was an even more generous replacement financed by my parents, which he crashed backing out of our driveway while texting. The third was another investment in his future that mysteriously developed transmission problems right around the time he needed cash for a trip to Cancun with friends. And then there was the debt. Credit cards opened during his brief college stints. Loans from friends that somehow became my parents' responsibility. Expensive electronics purchased on installment plans and then sold for quick cash. A string of get-rich-quick schemes that only made other people rich. Through it all, my parents sighed, shook their heads, wrote checks, and assured everyone that James was finding himself and would figure it out eventually. Meanwhile, I was the responsible child, the counterbalance to Hurricane James. I earned straight A's from elementary school through high school, joined every academic club available, and won state competitions in mathematics and debate. I worked part-time at the local library, starting at 16, saving every dollar I could. When it came time for a car, I bought a used Toyota with my own money, feeling immense pride as I handed over the cash I'd saved for 2 years. Architecture had been my dream since I was 12, and discovered a book about famous buildings in our school library. I spent hours drawing elaborate floor plans and building miniature structures from whatever materials I could find. When I received a partial scholarship to the architecture program at Penn State, it felt like everything I'd worked for was finally paying off. My parents had promised to help with my education. There was a college fund they'd started when I was born, the same as they had for James. Mine was still intact because of my scholarship and careful budgeting, while James's had been depleted and replenished multiple times. They assured me the money would be there when I needed it for my senior year and graduate studies. In recent months, our family dynamic had shifted yet again. James had lost another job, this time as a sales associate at an electronics store, claiming his manager had it out for him after he was caught giving unauthorized discounts to attractive customers. He moved back home sleeping until noon and helping himself to whatever was in the refrigerator. His presence filled our house, from the shoes kicked off in the hallway to the dirty dishes left in the sink, to the constant stream of complaints about how unfair the world was to him. Through it all, I stayed focused on my education. Architecture school was demanding, with long nights in the studio and complex projects that required absolute precision. My junior year had been my most challenging, yet with advanced structural engineering courses and a competitive internship at a local firm that I hoped would lead to full-time employment after graduation. I maintained my GPA and even managed to save a little money from my internship stipend. When my parents suggested dinner at Salvatore's, my favorite Italian restaurant, to celebrate my birthday and the end of the school year, I was genuinely excited. Maybe, just maybe, this would be a moment of recognition for my hard work. Maybe this time the conversation wouldn't revolve around James and his latest crisis. Maybe for just one evening, I could feel like my achievements mattered too. I was wrong, so very wrong. I spent all day getting ready for my birthday dinner. I wore a new navy blue dress I'd been saving for a special occasion, curled my long brown hair, and even applied makeup, which I rarely bothered with during finals week. I wanted to look nice in the photos I imagined we'd take, commemorating my 22nd birthday and another successful year of college behind me. When I came downstairs, Mom was on the phone, speaking in the hushed, urgent tone she reserved for conversations about James. Dad was jingling his keys nervously, checking his watch every few minutes. James was nowhere to be seen. "Is James coming to dinner?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Mom ended her call quickly. "No, sweetheart, he wasn't feeling well. It'll just be us tonight." I felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by guilt. What kind of sister was happy her brother wouldn't be at her birthday dinner? But I couldn't deny that his absence would make the evening more peaceful. The drive to Salvatore's was awkwardly quiet. Mom kept checking her phone thumbs, typing rapidly. Dad focused intently on the road, though the restaurant was only 15 minutes away, and he'd driven there countless times. I sat in the back seat, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. Salvatore's was busy for a Thursday night. The hostess led us to a corner table draped in a red and white checkered tablecloth, a small candle flickering in the center. The aroma of garlic and tomato sauce filled the air, and soft Italian music played in the background. Under normal circumstances, I would have felt instantly at ease in this warm, familiar environment. But nothing about this evening felt normal. Mom and Dad exchanged glances throughout the meal, some kind of silent conversation happening above the breadbasket. They asked perfunctory questions about my finals and summer plans, barely listening to my answers before checking their phones again. I tried to keep things light, telling a funny story about my roommate's disastrous attempt at making tiramisu, but their laughter seemed forced. "Is everything okay?" I finally asked as our entrees arrived. "Everything's fine," Mom said too quickly. "Let's just enjoy our dinner." I picked at my fettuccine alfredo, my appetite diminishing with each tense minute. Dad ordered a second glass of wine, unusual for him on a weeknight. Mom barely touched her chicken parmesan, her fork pushing food around rather than eating it. When the waiter brought out a small chocolate cake with a single candle, I forced a smile. He sang "Happy Birthday" alone, my parents joining in half-heartedly toward the end. I made a wish as I blew out the candle, something simple and naive about having a nice family evening. That's when Mom cleared her throat. "Lucia, before you have your cake, we need to discuss something." The seriousness in her tone made my stomach drop. Dad suddenly became very interested in rearranging his silverware. "What is it?" I asked, though some part of me already knew it involved James. Mom reached into her purse and pulled out two folded documents, placing them on the table between us. "Your brother is going through a difficult time." She began, using the same phrase I'd heard countless times throughout my life. "James has made some mistakes," Dad added, not meeting my eyes. "But he's ready to turn things around. He just needs a fresh start. Okay, I said slowly, not touching the papers. What does that have to do with me? Mom pushed the first document toward me. We've had to make some difficult decisions for the family. I unfolded the paper. It was a receipt for the sale of my Toyota, the car I had bought with my own savings. The sale had been completed 2 days earlier. You sold my car. My voice came out as a whisper. How could you sell my car? It was in my name. We're both on the title, remember, Mom said. When you bought it at 17, you needed an adult cosigner. I'd forgotten that detail, a technicality that had never seemed important until now. My hands began to shake as I opened the second document. It was a bank statement for my college fund, showing a withdrawal of the entire balance, nearly $18,000. The date stamp was from the previous week. My college fund, I said, my voice hollow. You took all of it. We had to, Mom said, her tone suggesting she was the victim here. James has gotten himself into a situation, and if we don't help him now, it could affect his entire future. What about my future? I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. I was counting on that money for my senior year in graduate school. You have your scholarship, Dad pointed out weakly. And you've always been so good at figuring things out. Before I could respond, Mom pulled out a third document and slid it across the table. There's one more thing we need you to do. It was a loan agreement for $25,000, with a space for my signature as a co-signer. My brother's name was already signed at the bottom. James needs to consolidate his debts, Mom explained, as if describing something as mundane as a grocery list. The bank won't approve the loan without a co-signer who has good credit. Your father and I have already extended ourselves too much with the mortgage refinance last year. You want me to co-sign a loan for $25,000? I stared at them, waiting for this to reveal itself as some elaborate, cruel birthday joke. It's the only way he can get back on his feet, Dad said. You know your brother. He has so much potential. And what happens when he doesn't pay it back? I asked, already knowing the answer. Mom's expression hardened. Family helps family, Lucia. We've always taught you that. You need to sign it tonight, Dad added. The loan officer is waiting for our call. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what was happening. Not only had they sold my car and emptied my college fund without my knowledge or consent, but now they wanted me to put my financial future at risk for a brother who had never shown any responsibility. And if I don't sign? I finally asked. Mom's eyes narrowed slightly. Then you'll need to find somewhere else to live. We can't support someone who won't support their own family. The ultimatum hung in the air between us, as heavy and suffocating as a wool blanket in August. Around us, the restaurant continued as normal families, celebrating couples, laughing waiters, delivering plates of steaming pasta. But at our table, something had shattered irreparably. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't flip the table or storm out or create the scene that was building inside me. Instead, I picked up my fork, cut a bite of chocolate cake, and put it in my mouth. It tasted like nothing. I'll think about it, I said quietly. Mom looked like she wanted to push further, but Dad placed his hand over hers. Let's finish our dinner, he said. It's Lucia's birthday after all. We ate in silence, the cake turning to ash in my mouth. When the check came, Dad paid quickly, and we walked to the car without speaking. As we drove home, I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, each one illuminating a decision that was becoming clearer with every mile. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I knew exactly what I had to do. Back at home, an oppressive silence filled the house. Mom disappeared into the master bedroom while Dad settled into his recliner with the remote control, turning the volume up on a baseball game he didn't really care about. Neither of them mentioned the loan documents again, as if giving me space to make the right decision on my own. I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. My childhood room remained largely unchanged from high school, with architecture posters on the walls and bookshelves filled with fantasy novels and design textbooks. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my navy blue dress, and tried to steady my breathing. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake staring at the ceiling scenes from my life playing on a continuous loop. There was 10-year-old me proudly showing my parents a perfect math test only to have mom glance at it and ask if I'd seen James's baseball glove. There was 13-year-old me winning the county science fair, standing alone at the award ceremony, because my parents were at James's football game, which his team lost badly. There was 16-year-old me working weekends and summers at the library, saving every dollar, while James wrecked his first car and was rewarded with a newer model. There was 18-year-old me opening my college acceptance letter alone in my room, because everyone was busy consoling James after he'd been caught cheating on a final and put on academic probation. There were 1,000 tiny moments of inequality that I'd brushed aside, explained away, or simply accepted as the way things were in our family. I told myself it wasn't favoritism, just that James needed more help. I convinced myself that one day my parents would see my worth too. But now, lying in my childhood bed after what should have been a celebration had turned into the ultimate betrayal. I couldn't lie to myself anymore. Nothing would ever change unless I changed it. My parents would keep taking from me to give to James until there was nothing left, not even my future. I sat up and switched on my bedside lamp. It was just past midnight. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of the television downstairs. My mind was suddenly eerily clear. I pulled out my phone and checked my bank account, $2,347.15, saved from my internship and birthday money from my grandmother. Not enough to replace a car or pay for my senior year, but enough for a fresh start if I was careful. Next, I checked my credit score, 768. I'd been building credit since I got my first secured card at 18, making small purchases and paying them off immediately. My score was excellent, which is exactly why my parents wanted me to co-sign James's loan. If I did, that score would almost certainly be destroyed when he inevitably defaulted. I opened my contacts and scrolled through, mentally categorizing people I could count on. Ashley, my best friend since freshman year, who had always offered her couch if I needed a place to stay. Professor Jenkins, who had mentioned summer research positions that included housing. My boss at the internship, who had hinted at possibly increasing my hours. For a brief moment, I considered giving in. Maybe I could sign the loan, finish school living at home, and just pray that James would actually make the payments. Maybe sacrificing my financial future was the price of keeping peace in the family. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a fantasy. James had never followed through on anything in his life. The loan would default, my credit would be ruined, and I'd still be expected to bail him out the next time and the next in an endless cycle that would drown us both. The house creaked and settled around me as I made the hardest decision of my life. At 2 in the morning, with everyone asleep, I quietly pulled my suitcase from under the bed. I packed methodically, taking only what I truly needed: clothes for a week, important documents, my laptop and school materials, and a few sentimental items that couldn't be replaced. I looked around at everything I was leaving behind. The bookshelf my grandfather had built for me, the collection of architecture books I'd accumulated over years, the framed photo of my high school graduation, one of the few times my parents had seemed genuinely proud of me. But these were just things, and staying for things would cost me everything. Before leaving, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. The words flowed easily, years of unspoken truths finally finding their way onto paper. I didn't write from anger, though I felt it burning inside me. Instead, I wrote with clarity and purpose, explaining exactly why I couldn't sign the loan and why I had to leave. I sealed the letter in an envelope, wrote "family" on the front, and placed it on my pillow where it would be easily found. I took one last look around the room that had been my sanctuary and prison, then quietly closed the door. The house was dark and silent as I made my way downstairs, careful to avoid the third step that always creaked. I placed my house key on the entryway table, a small but significant surrender. Then, with my suitcase in one hand and backpack over my shoulder, I slipped out the front door into the warm June night. I didn't look back as I walked away from the only home I'd ever known. The weight of my family's expectations, disappointments, and manipulations seemed to lighten with each step. By the time I reached the end of the block, I was crying, but they weren't entirely tears of sadness. For the first time in 22 years, I was making a choice that was entirely for myself. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. It was 3:15 in the morning on the day after my birthday, and my new life was just beginning. The letter I left behind was 4 pages long, handwritten on notebook paper in my neat architectural print. I'd always been taught to be clear and precise in my communication, and this might be the most important thing I'd ever write. "Dear Mom, Dad, and James," it began. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm not running away from my problems. I'm running toward my future, something I realize now I need to protect because no one else will do it for me." I explained my decision plainly without the emotion that churned inside me. I cannot and will not co-sign a loan for $25,000 that I know will never be repaid. My credit score and financial future are not collateral for James's bad decisions. Selling my car without consulting me was a violation of trust. Taking my college fund, which you promised would be there for my education, is a betrayal I cannot simply brush aside. I included facts they might not have known or had chosen to ignore. While you've been focusing on James's needs, I've been helping Grandma pay for her medications since her insurance changed last year. I send $200 every month to Cousin Ellie for her textbooks because Uncle Steve lost his job. I've never complained or mentioned these things because I believed that's what family does for each other. But now I see that in our family support only flows in one direction. I attached bank statements showing these transfers, along with a spreadsheet of James's previous unpaid debts that I'd quietly compiled over the years. I added a printout explaining the legal consequences of loan default, highlighting the parts about co-signers being fully responsible for repayment, and the 7-year impact on credit reports. I included my academic transcript showing my 3.9 GPA letters of recommendation from professors and the certificate from my internship evaluation describing me as exceptionally promising. I wanted them to see in black and white exactly what they were risking with their ultimatum. The final paragraph was the hardest to write. "I love you all despite everything, but I've realized that loving someone doesn't mean destroying yourself to save them. I need to prioritize my future now. When you're ready to have a relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation and manipulation, you know how to reach me. Until then, I wish you well, especially James. I hope he finds whatever he's looking for, but I can no longer be the safety net that prevents him from learning life's necessary lessons." I signed it simply, Lucia. When my family woke the next morning, the discovery of my absence and the letter created exactly the chaos I'd anticipated. From texts sent by neighbors and calls from family friends, I pieced together the scene. James found the letter first bursting into my room around 9, looking to borrow money for a date. Finding my room half empty and the letter on my pillow, he scanned it quickly, then ran downstairs in a panic. Without my signature on the loan documents, his latest plan for easy money had evaporated. He began calling mutual friends, his voice increasingly desperate, as no one admitted to knowing my whereabouts. Dad took a more active approach. After reading the letter, his face drained of color as the reality of what they'd done finally hit him. He grabbed his car keys and began driving around town, checking the bus station, campus coffee shops, and anywhere else he thought I might have gone. He called my internship office, only to be told I'd requested a week of personal leave the night before. He drove in expanding circles around our neighborhood, looking for some sign of his missing daughter, the one he'd always assumed would just be there, steady and reliable no matter what. Mom's reaction was the most dramatic. According to our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Winters, she heard my mother crying uncontrollably in the kitchen around 10 that morning. Through the window, she could see Mom clutching the letter in one hand and her phone in the other, leaving tearful voicemails that fluctuated between apologies and accusations. "How could you do this to us?" Followed immediately by, "Please come home, we can work this out." The family crisis was impossible to hide in our close-knit community. By noon, 3 different neighbors had brought casseroles, as if food could somehow fix what had been broken. By evening, the story had spread throughout the neighborhood, details becoming more exaggerated with each retelling. I had run away with a boyfriend. I had joined a cult. I had been secretly planning this for months. The truth was both simpler and more complicated. I was staying in Ashley's apartment near campus, sleeping on her lumpy pull-out sofa, and trying to figure out my next steps. She had opened her door at 4 in the morning without hesitation, made up the couch with clean sheets, and promised I could stay as long as I needed. Her only question was, "Are you okay?" To which I honestly answered, "Not yet, but I will be." That first day, I turned off my phone after sending brief messages to people who needed to know I was safe. To my grandmother, "I've left home. I'm safe. Will explain later." To my boss at the internship, "Family emergency. Taking personal days. We'll be in touch soon." To Professor Jenkins, "Need to discuss housing options. Can we meet next week?" Short, practical messages that would prevent unnecessary worry without inviting questions I wasn't ready to answer. I spent most of that day in a strange, numb state, alternating between sleeping on Ashley's couch and staring blankly at the ceiling. The adrenaline that had carried me through the night had crashed, leaving me exhausted, but unable to truly rest. Ashley brought me tea and sandwiches that I barely touched, then sat beside me in companionable silence, not pushing for details I wasn't ready to share. By evening, I felt strong enough to check my phone. There were 27 missed calls, 15 from Mom, 8 from Dad, 3 from James, and 1 from my grandmother. The voicemails ranged from tearful pleas to angry demands to confused questions. I listened to each one feeling strangely detached, as if they were messages for someone else. I only returned one call. When my grandmother answered, her voice was calm but concerned. "Lucia, are you all right?" "I'm okay, Grandma," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I had to leave home. It's a long story." "Your mother called me hysterical," she said. "Something about your brother needing money and you abandoning the family." I gave her the briefest version of events, leaving out the details about sending her money for medications. She didn't need that burden. "Oh, Lucia," she sighed when I finished. "I was afraid something like this would happen eventually. Your parents have never seen how they enable that boy." "You're not upset with me?" I asked, surprised by her reaction. "Upset? No, sweetheart. I'm sad that you had to make such a difficult choice, but sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do." After a pause, she added, "I want you to know I'm proud of you. You've always been the strongest one in this family, even if no one has told you that." Her words broke something open inside me, and for the first time since leaving home, I allowed myself to cry. Not the quiet tears I'd shed walking away from my house, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from my very core. Ashley sat beside me on the couch, rubbing my back as I cried into the phone. Grandma just listened occasionally, murmuring soft words of comfort until I could breathe normally again. "What are you going to do now?" she finally asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Find a place to live, figure out how to pay for my senior year without the college fund. Get a job, I guess." "I wish I could help more," Grandma said, and I could hear the genuine regret in her voice. "I'm on a fixed income, but I can send a little something to help you get started." "No, Grandma, that's not why I called. I don't expect anyone to bail me out." "It's not a bailout, Lucia. It's an investment in someone who has never let me down. Let me do this small thing for you." I wanted to refuse to prove I could do this entirely on my own, but I recognized that pride too closely resembled my mother's stubbornness. "Thank you," I said instead. "I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart. Stay strong. And Lucia, send me a copy of that letter you wrote. I have a feeling your grandfather would have been very proud of it." After ending the call, I curled up on Ashley's couch and slept for 12 straight hours, the first truly restful sleep I'd had since my birthday. When I woke, it was with a clarity and purpose I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. The next 3 weeks were both the hardest and most liberating of my life. Each day brought new challenges, but also small victories that proved I was capable of more than I'd ever been allowed to believe. My first priority was finding a place to live. Ashley was generous with her couch, but her tiny one-bedroom apartment wasn't meant for 2 people long-term. I spent mornings scouring rental listings looking for anything affordable near campus. Rental prices in college towns are notoriously high, especially for single occupants, and my savings wouldn't last long with normal rent prices. After a week of discouraging searches, I found a listing for a house share that seemed promising. 4 female graduate students needed a 5th roommate after someone unexpectedly transferred schools. The rent was reasonable when split 5 ways, and the location was walking distance to both campus and my internship. I contacted them immediately and arranged to see the room. The house was an older Victorian that had been converted into student housing with creaky floors and drafty windows, but also character and charm. The room was small, but had a large window that filled it with natural light. My potential roommates were all serious students in various programs from marine biology to comparative literature, who wanted a quiet, studious environment. After a brief interview, where they asked about my sleep schedule and cleaning habits, they offered me the room on the spot. "You seem like you have your life together," said Tanya, the marine biology student who seemed to be the unofficial leader of the house. "That's surprisingly rare around here." I almost laughed at the irony. If only she knew how completely my life had just fallen apart. But perhaps that was the point. Despite everything, I was still standing, still moving forward. Maybe that was what having it together really meant. With housing secured, I turned my attention to finances. The University Financial Aid Office was my next stop. I explained my situation as clinically as possible to a counselor named Mr. Abernathy, a kind-faced man with salt and pepper hair who listened without judgment. "Unfortunately, it's late in the cycle for additional scholarships," he said after reviewing my file. "But given your academic standing and the unusual circumstances, we might be able to arrange an emergency grant for part of your tuition. And there's a work-study position opening in the architecture department that could cover some expenses." It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a start. I left his office with applications for emergency aid information, about private student loans as a last resort, and the contact information for the department's administrative assistant about the work-study position. My internship became another potential lifeline. I met with my supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Diana, who had been in the architecture field for 30 years. I hadn't planned to explain my personal situation, but something about her direct gaze made me feel I could be honest. "I need more hours," I said simply. "My financial situation has changed, and I'm paying my own way through senior year now." Diana studied me for a long moment. "We don't usually offer full-time positions to interns," she said. "But your work has been exceptional, and we just landed the library renovation project. I could use someone to help with the preliminary drawings. It would mean early mornings and some weekends." "I can do that," I said quickly. "I'll make it work with my class schedule in the fall." She nodded. "See that you do. I'm taking a chance on you, Lucia. Don't make me regret it." "I won't," I promised, and I meant it more than she could know. With housing and income beginning to take shape, I finally felt stable enough to address the physical and emotional toll of starting over. The first few days after leaving home, I'd barely slept or eaten. Now, in my tiny rented room with mismatched furniture and a mattress on the floor, I forced myself to establish routines. Regular meals even when I wasn't hungry. A consistent sleep schedule even when my mind raced with worries. Morning runs around the neighborhood even when my body protested. The anxiety attacks came without warning. In the shower, in the grocery store, walking to the internship. Moments when my chest would tighten and my vision would narrow, when the enormity of what I'd done and what lay ahead would threaten to overwhelm me. I developed coping mechanisms counting backward from 100, focusing on my breathing, listing architectural styles chronologically. Small tricks to remind myself that I was still in control even when it didn't feel that way. My support system expanded beyond Ashley. My new roommates, once they learned pieces of my story, became unexpected allies. Tanya helped me create a detailed budget. May, the comparative literature student, accompanied me to Goodwill to find essential household items. Zoe, studying psychology, listened without judgment when I needed to vent. Sarah, a chemistry PhD candidate, brought home leftovers from her waitressing job when she knew I was running low on grocery money. Then there was Grandma, true to her word. A week after our phone call, a card arrived containing $500 and a brief note, "For books or whatever you need. Your grandfather and I always believed in investing in education. Love you." It wasn't enough to replace my college fund, but it was enough to make me feel less alone in my struggle. Professor Jenkins came through as well, offering me a position as a research assistant for his Sustainable Urban Development project. The stipend was modest, but it came with access to the department's resources and valuable experience for my resume. More importantly, It was a vote of confidence from someone whose opinion I respected, a reminder that my academic worth wasn't tied to my family's support. My phone continued to accumulate messages from my parents and James. Mom's alternated between guilt trips, "I can't sleep, I'm worried sick about you," and angry accusations. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." Dad's were more subdued, mostly asking me to call and talk things through. James's were typically self-centered, focusing on how my departure had made things difficult for him, rather than showing any concern for my well-being. I read each message, but responded to none. It wasn't that I didn't care or had stopped loving them. It was that I recognized any communication now would be an attempt to pull me back into old patterns, to make me question the boundaries I'd just begun to establish. I needed time to strengthen my resolve before engaging with them again. 3 weeks into my new life, I was exhausted, but functioning. I had a place to live, multiple part-time jobs lined up, and a tentative plan for financing my senior year. My tiny room was gradually becoming a home with a secondhand desk where I worked on internship projects and a small shelf holding the few books I'd brought with me. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but it was mine, built with my own hands and choices. And then, just as I was finding my footing, my carefully constructed independence was tested. Ashley called one evening, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Your parents are here," she said. How did they find me?" "I think they've been asking around campus. They showed up at my door about 10 minutes ago asking if I knew where you were." I didn't confirm anything, but I think they could tell from my reaction. My heart raced. "Did you tell them where I'm living now?" "Of course not," Ashley said, sounding slightly offended. "But they're sitting in their car outside my building. I think they're waiting to see if you show up. What do you want me to do?" I closed my eyes, considering my options. I could hide, continue avoiding them indefinitely. I could call the police, report them for harassment, though that seemed extreme. Or I could face them on my terms, in a neutral location, with clear boundaries. "Tell them I'll meet them at the coffee shop on College Avenue in 30 minutes, I finally said. "Just them, not James. And Ashley. Thank you for being such a good friend through all this." "Always," she said simply. "Want me to come with you?" "No," I replied, surprised by my own certainty. "This is something I need to do alone." The coffee shop was busy with summer students studying and local residents enjoying the air conditioning on a warm June evening. I arrived early, deliberately choosing a table in the corner where I could see the entrance, but wouldn't be immediately visible to someone walking in. I ordered a plain black coffee, wrapping my hands around the warm mug to stop them from trembling. Mom and Dad arrived exactly on time, looking around anxiously until they spotted me. Mom's appearance shocked me. In just 3 weeks, she seemed to have aged years. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her face devoid of makeup. Dad looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. They approached my table cautiously, as if afraid I might flee. "Lucia," Mom said, her voice catching. She reached out as if to hug me, but I remained seated, and her arms fell awkwardly to her sides. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the chairs across from me. I was surprised by how calm I sounded. They sat exchanging uncertain glances. Mom immediately launched in. "We've been so worried. You can't just disappear like that. We're your family." "I left a letter explaining exactly why I was leaving," I said evenly. "And I'm an adult. I'm allowed to make my own decisions about where I live." "But without any warning," Dad protested weakly. "We came home and you were just gone. Would you have let me leave if I'd told you my plans?" I asked, knowing the answer. The question hung between us. Dad looked down at the table. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. "We made a mistake," Mom finally admitted, though it clearly cost her. "We shouldn't have presented things the way we did on your birthday. We were desperate." "You sold my car without asking," I said. "You emptied my college fund without consulting me. You demanded I risk my financial future for James, who has never faced consequences for his actions. These weren't presentation mistakes, Mom. They were betrayals of trust." "Your brother needed help," she insisted, a familiar defensiveness creeping into her tone. "He's family." "So am I said quietly. "But my needs have always come second to his." Dad cleared his throat. "Things have been difficult since you left. James, he's created some new problems. I wasn't surprised. What happened? When you didn't sign the loan, he tried to get money another way, Dad said, looking uncomfortable. He borrowed your identity. My blood ran cold. What? He tried to open a credit card in your name, Mom explained, having the grace to look ashamed. He had access to your social security number from some old tax forms. The bank called to verify some information, and that's how we found out. Did you report him to the police? I asked, already knowing the answer. Mom looked horrified. Of course not. He's your brother. And I'm his sister. But that didn't stop him from committing identity theft, I pointed out. So what happened? We stopped it before the card was issued, Dad said. And we've cut him off. He's looking for a job now, a real one. We told him he has 3 months to find steady employment or he needs to move out. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical that they would actually follow through with such an ultimatum when they never had before. Why are you telling me this? Because we want you to come home, Mom said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't reciprocate the gesture either. We miss you. The house feels empty without you. We were wrong, Dad added, surprising me with his directness. We've been unfair to you for years, expecting you to be the responsible one, while we made excuses for James. Reading your letter, it made us see things we've been avoiding for a long time. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they really did understand. Maybe things could change. But then Mom continued, if you come home now, we can put all this behind us. We'll help you figure out tuition for your senior year. Maybe we can find another car not as nice as your Toyota, but something reliable. Things can go back to normal. And just like that, the hope evaporated. They hadn't really heard me at all. They wanted things to go back to normal, which meant going back to the same dynamic that had driven me away in the first place. They weren't offering real change, just temporary concessions to lure me back into the fold. I'm not coming home, I said firmly. I have an apartment with roommates. I have a plan for school. I'm taking control of my own life now. Mom's expression hardened. So that's it. You're just abandoning your family because of one disagreement. It wasn't a disagreement, Mom. It was the last in a lifetime of moments where you showed me exactly where I stand in our family hierarchy. And I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm establishing boundaries. Boundaries? She repeated the word like it was foreign. We're your parents. There aren't supposed to be boundaries. That's exactly the problem, I said, feeling suddenly tired. You see any assertion of independence as a rejection, rather than a natural part of growing up. Dad placed his hand on Mom's arm, a subtle restraint. What would it take, Lucia, for us to have a relationship going forward? What would you need from us? The question surprised me. It was the first time either of my parents had asked what I wanted, rather than telling me what I should do. I took a moment to consider my answer carefully. Respect, I finally said. Respect for my independence and my decisions. No financial entanglements that involve James. Acknowledgement of the favoritism that's defined our family dynamic for as long as I can remember. And time. I need time and space to figure out who I am outside of the role I've played in our family. Mom looked like she wanted to argue, but Dad nodded slowly. That seems fair, he said. We can give you time, and we can try to do better with the rest. Try isn't good enough anymore, Dad, I said gently. I need to see actual change. The conversation continued for another hour, circling through painful truths and tentative possibilities. Mom alternated between defensive anger and tearful pleas. Dad seemed genuinely reflective, asking questions about my new living situation and plans for school that showed real interest rather than judgment. By the time we parted, nothing was resolved, but something had shifted. They had seen me as an adult making my own choices, perhaps for the first time. Can we call you? Dad asked as we stood to leave. Just to check in? Once a week? I agreed. Sunday evenings would be good. Mom hugged me before leaving, holding on a beat too long. I do love you, she whispered, even if I haven't shown it the right way. I know, I said, because despite everything I did believe that. I love you too. That's why I had to do this. As I watched them walk to their car, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and strength. The conversation hadn't gone perfectly, but it had happened on my terms. I had spoken my truth without being silenced or dismissed. It was a small victory, but an important one. The journey toward a healthier family dynamic would be long and uncertain. There would be setbacks and disappointments alongside any progress. But for the first time, I believed that journey might be possible, even if it looked nothing like the path I'd originally imagined. 2 weeks later, I had a similar conversation with James, though in a very different tone. He showed up at my internship unannounced, looking unusually subdued. The designer at the desk next to mine pointed him out, and I reluctantly agreed to take a short break to speak with him in the small courtyard outside our office building. "You look good," he said awkwardly as we sat on a stone bench beneath a maple tree. "The independent life suits you." "It's not easy," I admitted, "but it's mine." "What do you want, James?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache with complicated emotion. "I wanted to apologize for everything. The loan, trying to use your identity." He paused, looking genuinely ashamed. "I've never been a good brother to you." "No," I agreed, not softening the truth to make him feel better. "You haven't." "I'm seeing someone," he said after a moment. "A therapist, I mean, twice a week. Dad's paying for it, but it was my idea." That surprised me. James had always mocked therapy as something for weak people who can't handle reality. "The therapist thinks I might have some issues with impulse control and entitlement," he continued with a self-deprecating smile. "Shocking, right?" Despite myself, I smiled too. "Groundbreaking diagnosis." "I got a job," he added. "Nothing fancy. Stocking shelves at the grocery store on night shift. But I haven't missed a day in 3 weeks." "That's good," I said, meaning it. "I hope you stick with it." "I'm not asking you to forgive me," James said, suddenly serious, "or to come back. I just wanted you to know that your leaving, it forced everyone to face some hard truths, especially me." I studied my brother's face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown so accustomed to, but all I saw was exhaustion and something new, something that looked almost like humility. "I can't trust you yet," I told him honestly. "That will take time and consistent actions, not just words." "I know," he nodded. "I don't trust myself either, if that makes sense. But I'm trying. For the first time maybe ever, I'm really trying." As he left, promising to stay in touch but not pushing for more than I was ready to give, I felt a cautious optimism. People could change if they truly wanted to. The question was whether that change would last beyond the initial shock and crisis that had prompted it. Only time would tell. And for the first time in my life, I had the freedom to wait and see without sacrificing my own well-being in the process. 1 year after the birthday that changed everything, my life looked completely different. I was preparing to graduate with my bachelor's degree in architecture, having completed my senior year against all odds. The journey hadn't been easy, but each challenge overcome had built my confidence in ways I never could have anticipated. My housing situation had stabilized. I remained in the Victorian house with my graduate student roommates, who had become close friends as well as housemates. We celebrated each other's academic victories, consoled each other through setbacks, and created our own kind of family based on mutual respect and shared experiences. Financially, I'd pieced together what I needed through multiple sources. The emergency grant from the university covered a portion of my tuition. My work-study position in the architecture department paid for books and supplies. The internship, which had evolved into a part-time professional position, covered my rent and living expenses. And to my surprise, Grandma had organized a family scholarship, contributed to by various aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd been impressed by the stand I'd taken, providing enough to fill the remaining gaps without loans. I'd purchased another car, not as nice as my Toyota, but reliable enough for my needs. It was a 10-year-old Honda with faded paint and a temperamental air conditioner, but I'd paid for it entirely myself, and the title was in my name alone. Every time I drove it, I felt a surge of pride knowing it represented my independence. My relationship with my parents had evolved into something unexpected. The weekly Sunday calls had continued, sometimes awkward, sometimes heated, but increasingly honest. Mom still struggled with respecting my boundaries, occasionally slipping into old patterns of guilt and manipulation. But when called out, she was learning to recognize and adjust her behavior rather than becoming defensive. Dad had changed the most. Once I was removed from the house, he seemed to find his voice in our family dynamics. He began attending therapy himself, working through his conflict avoidance and the patterns that had allowed James's behavior to continue unchecked for so long. During one particularly meaningful call, he apologized for the years of emotional neglect, a term he'd learned in therapy that perfectly described my childhood experience of always being overlooked in favor of my brother's more demanding presence. James remained the most uncertain element in our family equation. His progress came in waves periods of genuine growth, followed by minor setbacks. He'd maintained his grocery store job for 6 months before being promoted to a daytime shift supervisor. He'd enrolled in community college classes just 2 at a time and was actually completing the coursework. He'd moved into a small apartment with a roommate, taking his first steps toward true independence at 25. Our relationship was cautious but cordial. We met occasionally for coffee, keeping conversations light and avoiding the deeper family dynamics that could still trigger old resentments. He never asked for money, which seemed like a small miracle. Whether this represented genuine change or simply the knowledge that I would refuse any such request remained to be seen. The most significant relationship in my life had come unexpectedly. During a presentation for my senior design project, I'd met Marcus, a graduate student in environmental engineering, who was collaborating with the architecture department on sustainable building designs. His thoughtful questions about my project led to coffee, which led to dinner, which evolved into the healthiest relationship I'd ever experienced. Marcus came from a large, boisterous family that operated with a level of emotional honesty that initially terrified me. They argued openly, resolved conflicts directly, and loved each other fiercely without the undercurrents of resentment and obligation I'd grown up with. Through him, I began to see what healthy family dynamics could look like, setting a new standard for what I might create in my own future. My career path was taking shape as well. The architecture firm where I'd interned had offered me a full-time position after graduation, with the possibility of sponsoring my master's degree after a year of work experience. The offer represented everything I'd worked for: a chance to contribute to meaningful projects while continuing my education and professional development. As my actual birthday approached, I decided to reclaim the date that had been so painfully transformed the previous year. I planned a small celebration with my closest friends at a local restaurant, not the Italian place with its difficult memories, but a new Thai restaurant that had become a favorite spot for post-exam celebrations. The evening of my 23rd birthday was everything my 22nd should have been. Ashley gave a toast that made everyone laugh and me cry a little. My roommates presented a collective gift of professional drafting tools I'd been eyeing but couldn't afford. Marcus gave me a delicate silver necklace with a tiny architect's compass pendant to always help you find your way. Even Grandma made a surprise appearance, having taken the bus from her retirement community 2 hours away, just to be part of the celebration. To my surprise, my parents had sent a card with a modest check and a note that simply said, "For whatever you need. No strings attached. We're proud of you." It wasn't an extravagant gesture, but the acknowledgement of my independence represented real progress. James sent a text message rather than a card. "Happy birthday, sis. Thanks for the wake-up call last year. Still working on being the brother you deserve." It was brief but sincere, another small step in what would likely be a lifelong journey of redefining our relationship. As I looked around the table at the people who had supported me through the most challenging year of my life, I felt a profound sense of peace. The path I'd chosen hadn't been easy, but it had been right. By standing up for myself, by refusing to sacrifice my future for patterns that had never served me, I had created something beautiful from something painful. The healing wasn't complete, and perhaps it never would be entirely. Family dynamics established over decades don't transform overnight. Trust broken so thoroughly takes years to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all. But I was no longer waiting for external validation or permission to live my life on my own terms. The greatest lesson from that terrible birthday hadn't been about family betrayal, though that was certainly part of it. The real lesson had been about my own strength, my capacity to face difficult truths and make difficult choices, my ability to build a life guided by my own values rather than others' expectations. As we shared dessert and laughter, I silently thanked my younger self for having the courage to pack a suitcase and walk away from everything familiar toward an uncertain future. That uncertain future had become a present filled with purpose, authentic connections, and hard-won wisdom. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for others is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their actions. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves is to walk away from situations that diminish us, even when those situations are wrapped in the complicated packaging of family love. My story isn't over. In many ways, it's just beginning. But now I'm the one holding the pen, writing each new chapter with intention and hope. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between your own well-being and family expectations? How did you find the courage to stand up for yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that. It's okay to choose yourself sometimes. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that every ending, even painful ones, can become the beginning of something beautiful if you're brave enough to take that first step.